Good morning. How are you? If you're a guest of this, welcome. It's taken me 2 services to figure out what she meant by the Adam shared many interesting things, but I think I get it. I think she's referring to the boxer briefs, or whitey's tighties analogy, don't you? So it took me a while, but anyway, she's not here, else I would thank her for the shout out. If you're a guest of this, welcome. We're a people that like to gather on Sunday and wrestle with the text, with Jesus, with what it really means to be his, knowing him, growing in him, those types of things. And we hope this is a venue, a type of atmosphere that's incredibly conducive to those things. Like, we want this to be the type of place that people would be proud to invite their friends, and people would be comfortable asking deep, penetrating, challenging, incredibly important questions. But also, we talk a lot about gather and scatter, and that's our way of saying that our bent is that God is looking for a people who will not simply just do this week after week after week, but who will get out there and tell God's story by the way we live, hence the name Narrate. And so, as you know, well, you wouldn't know if you're a guest, which is why I'm doing all this, so that doesn't make any sense. We talk a lot about organic kingdom bringing, that life affords us ample opportunity to serve God without signing our name on any kind of sheet, of an organization that has a Christian logo in it, or a cross in their logo. Like, that the skills that you have, the neighborhood you live in, the relationships you hold give you ample opportunity to serve people and love God by loving people. And then periodically we like to come together and matter together. Man, that's too many togethers in one sentence. We want to be the type of place that someone would go, man, I sure don't like Jesus, but I'm really thankful that church exists in our community because we're better because they're here. And so the climbing wall at Alive at 5 is something to that end. Someone gave us a climbing wall, and Hearing the Vision gave us a climbing wall. And so after some meetings with the Downtown Association, they said, man, there's really not very much to do for kids and teens. So that's what we're doing there, just to kind of remind you of that vision. So it's full, which causes me first to say, good job. I mean, every week, I believe, with one exception, is covered, which is a big deal, because that's quite the undertaking. So good job. Just can't express. Every time we meet as council, the guys are like, man, we just can't lose sight of how generous of a community of people God is assembling here. So good job. And if you're someone that's not yet signed up to help with the climbing wall, and you're looking for a way to kind of build relationships and matter with us, that wall is a chance there. So they're trying to add a third person, so holler if you want to be a part of that. Also, we got ourselves involved in this thing called pulling tags. Has it been skipping? No? I just pointed out a technical thing, which is a big faux pas, so sorry, Joe. Anyway, last service, my microphone kept skipping. Did it really? Should I throw it against the wall? You think that'll fix it? We've got a problem with this pack. Okay. So we're putting tags off trees on Mount... Oh, gosh. Going home. We're pulling tags off of trees on Mount Helena, which was a project that was a little bigger than we thought it was going to be. Mostly we learned something about the culture of this place, because we thought, hey, let's not do this let's all gather in the parking lot on Saturday morning. It's summer. Let's just invite people to do it on their own time, go up to trees and pull surveyor's tape off of them and put them in their pocket or in a bag. But what we learned is that you don't like that. You like to do that together, not alone. Which I probably should have understood before we created that invitation, but nonetheless, we've learned something. The other side is we've overpromised and underdelivered at this point, which is something we work really hard around here not to do. They're not bent out of shape at all, but we're a little late. So if you want to help with that this week, let us know. We'd love to coordinate that for you. It'll still be you by yourself, with our assurance that we won't do that to you again. Okay? Okay. I debated in my head how to introduce my friend Rob to you this morning, because it's always hard to introduce people. So I'm just going to say this. When I was 17, I was dating a girl whose parents had a rule that she had to go to church once a week. She's not my wife, by the way. And so I started hanging out at this great church in Billings called Faith Chapel, which is where I first was introduced to this guy, Rob. Rob, at the time, in that little season, he had just transitioned out of high school ministry and was helping with what we called big church back then. And so he was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of, just mostly teaching on Wednesday nights, not music, right? And so here I was, a 17-year-old student with not a lot of church background in my life, listening to a former youth pastor talk to me. So it was very relevant and very strategic in my own spiritual journey and what God was doing in me. A few years later, I started dating someone named Teresa, who I eventually married and who with my children and all of those types of things, who also has a really busted up ankle. Last time that there was a guest teacher, I told you how I chased her around the house and gave her a bloody lip with my gum, remember, because she doesn't like gum. she has a sprained ankle this week, and it has nothing to do with me. So just keep the authorities at bay. I am not guilty of anything. Anyway, he was also her youth pastor, so it was just really fun, and we developed this friendship. He's still on staff at Faith Chapel. My one memory that I'll pass on to you, well, one of them that's quite memorable to me was at our wedding counseling, or maybe it was even at the rehearsal. He said, okay, guys, here's how I'm going to direct you on the kiss. Too short, and no one will think it's going to last. Too long, and you gross out all the kids. So those were his parting words. So would you give it up for Rob? He's going to open the word for us.
Those are words to live by. That whole kiss thing is really critical, and obviously it took. So thanks for making that work for me today, because I understand you're roughing her up a little bit more often than usual, but I'm sure that'll work out too. Well, good morning, and it is fun to be in Helena today at Narrate. I've been looking forward to this. And it's fun on a number of levels because several of you are friends of mine, and we have some Billings connections, and I spent enough time up in Helena for other things that Helena is near and dear to my heart. So thanks to Adam and Teresa for taking the gamble and having old Rob drive up the road. So I'm just glad to be here. Somebody said to me once, and it really stayed with me, that there's a fine line between what is considered a hobby and what is considered a mental illness. Okay? And that's always kind of stayed with me a little bit. And so I, like Adam, he and I enjoy flying those electric remote control airplanes. We've sort of gotten into that. In fact, last fall I actually made the Billings Gazette with a picture the photographer captured. I think we brought it with us today. There's me in the Gazette, out in the park, 30 pounds heavier with some hair. And yeah, isn't that, boy, that's what a hero shot. I could see people, Sunday morning, oh, there's one of our pastors out in the park with a toy airplane. We're so proud and honored. So as you can see from the model airplane, I'm very focused. And one of the things I love the most about these model airplanes they have nowadays, they've got all these electrics. And you can get kits that you can put together. And I really like spending time putting them together and painting and detailing them almost as much as I enjoy flying them and crashing them. And so I brought one with you because I wanted to just kind of show you something that I worked on, finished this up a little earlier this spring. This is an A6M Mitsubishi Zero. It's a Japanese fighter plane from World War II, painted up in the Navy colors common for maybe the attack on Pearl Harbor. And you got to understand something about the kit. When you buy the kit, it's not even put together. It's styrofoam. It's white styrofoam. It's not painted. It's just in pieces. You got to glue the thing together and put it together and do some work on it. But I didn't stop there. The kit comes without landing gear, right? It's called a belly lander. You land it in the grass. But I went ahead and I've got a Dremel tool. And so I carved out the little wheel wells here in the wing. And I got some aftermarket landing gear, and I put a servo in there so that the landing gear actually retract. I can hit a switch while it's in the air, and the wheels can come up and down. And so I did that, and then I went ahead and put a little cover thing with some rare earth magnets like this. And this is a piece of styrofoam that I carved out with that Dremel tool and sanded it down to make kind of like a drop tank. So it kind of looks like a real drop tank. Oh, yeah. These things are really cool too because these are the leggings for the landing gear. Those didn't come with the kit either. Those are pieces of birch that I sanded. And then the whole plane is painted. There's no decals on the plane whatsoever. It's all painted with all of the stuff that you'd find in a history book about a World War II Mitsubishi Zero, even with Japanese writing on the wing. Isn't this cool? This is cool. And so I really, really have a good time with that. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself at this point, okay, Rob, so you got a little hobby. That's good. We're, happy for you. That's good. But I don't see what's wrong with that. You got to have something to take your mind off work and everything else. My wife, Tammy, would beg to differ with you. After 25 years of marriage, she's pretty convinced I'm moving into the realm of mental illness with this thing right now because this handcrafted, carefully assembled, pampered and detailed, customized Mitsubishi A6M Zero is actually my 10th. Not my 10th airplane, my 10th Zero. You see, the other 9 that were all built exactly the same way, with exactly the same amount of detail, time, effort, painting, carving, electronics, each met their own grisly demise with the dreaded figure 9. And it's to the place now where going to the hobby shop is kind of like the walk of shame for me, you know? You go into the hobby store, you pick up another kit, you know, like you've done 8 or 9 times before, and you walk to the cash register and you're just daring them to say something. Just, I dare you, because I'll be in the catalog ordering business so fast, you'll never see me in this shop again, so shut up. And so you walk up and you know what they're thinking. They're thinking, this is like his 8th or 9th zero, dude, you know. Fly it, don't crash it already. And so, you know, I put it back together and you know, the thing is, when you're out there in the field and you're messing with these dumb things and you're picking up the pieces and parts, I know, I can tell you this right now, the kit is really good. It's a great flying model kit. There's nothing wrong with this zero. There's lots wrong with this zero, but there's not much wrong with this zero. The trick is you got to learn some of the nuances, and basically, you know, you just got to be willing to get back on the horse. And so that's what I've done. I've just sort of gotten back on the horse. Now, you're probably right now asking a very obvious question. Gee, Rob, that's 5 minutes of my life I'll never get back. Thanks very much. What's the point? And here's the point. I wish I could stand before you this morning and say that I've spent as much time and effort working on picking up the pieces and figuring out the problems and getting back on the horse in other issues in my life that are far more important than just a toy airplane or a hobby. But the fact of the matter is, I haven't spent as much time doing those things with stuff that's far more important. And I'm talking about things like relationships. You know, when you have a relationship that hits some turbulence or maybe even crashes and burns. And I don't know about you, but there's a part of me sometimes that just wants to put the palms up and say, well, I'm done with that. I'm going to walk away. And the idea of getting back on the horse, especially if there's something going on in my heart and there's frustration, you know, that's easier to say than to do, because you know, getting back on that horse might be a little different than just going down to your hobby room and working on this. But isn't it a shame sometimes that we look at how we expend energy and effort to make something right in one area that ultimately really doesn't matter, but the really important things, maybe we don't spend as much time. So what I want to do is just sort of talk about relationships. And I'm going to put it in context of relationships with people even within a church and within a gathering. I've been on staff at Faith Chapel now for 18 years. I've been an ordained minister for most of those years. Been involved in church ministry to some degree for about 23 years. So, you know, I've been around, and I can honestly say that through the years, the number one thing that happens consistently is that you have run-ins with people that you go to church with. Probably even more than I have run-ins with people that I don't go to church with. And there have been times in these last 23 years where I have had a rub, it hit a storm, and quite frankly have been finished. You know, finished to the point to where I feel like I never want to have anything to do with church people again as long as I live. I'm done. I'm talking grow the big beard and move to Lincoln. Done. Okay? Finished. Done. But man, maybe you can relate. Some of the chuckling leads me to believe that, yeah, okay, I get the idea. So I want to talk about relationships, and I also want to use the analogy that a relationship storm is like any other storm. A storm can hit, it can find you, you can find yourself in the middle of it, and it can be a very dangerous and a very disturbing thing. Billings, you know, just last week we got hit with a tornado and took apart the Metra and took away the next 2 concerts we were supposed to have there. So the whole community's kind of reeling about that storm. It's not only left a mess, but it's left a lot of big questions about what to do from this point forward. And I also don't mind saying that it's left us all feeling a little vulnerable. You know, it's been since the 50s that we got clobbered by a tornado. So I guess Billings can get hit by a tornado, and people have to process that. But when it comes to the storms in relationships with people, we all know pretty much what the golden rule is, whether you've been in church your whole life or this is the first time you've ever come to something called a church. The bottom line is we probably could guess that God has a lot to say about turning the other cheek. And when someone offends you, you just treat them well, whether they're treating you well or not, or certainly don't hold any kind of grudge and never take revenge. I mean, that's kind of the golden rule principle, and we all get that. Well, listen to what the psalmist has to say. This is a bit of wisdom from an Old Testament book written by a guy that experienced everything you and I would ever experience. You know, 3,000 years ago, his life experience wouldn't be a lot different than our experience today. And this is what he has to say about this whole storm and this whole offense thing. He says, "Come, my children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you love life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Great words to live by. It's a great passage. It's one that I hold on to because, it's one thing to live by those words on a good day. You know what I'm saying? When everything is going good and you're at peace with people, it's great to read that and say, yes, I'm doing that. I'm just living at peace and love with everybody because everybody loves me and I love them. And move on. But, when the storm is hitting and you're in conflict with people, it's a little different, isn't it? It's a little more difficult to try to do that and feel like you're getting anywhere. So you look to the cross. And I love what Adam has to say about the cross, because the cross isn't just something that's hanging on a wall. The cross is an action, and it's an attitude, and it's a mindset from Christ where he literally went through this tremendous suffering and sacrifice, setting aside my transgressions and my offenses and your transgressions and your offenses. And he did it anyway because he loves us. And that's kind of the attitude that's conveyed by the psalmist, that even in the middle of a storm, when you have every right in the world to be angry and to act out, choose not to do that. Choose to pursue peace, because that's where you find the abundance of life, and that's where you find the favor of God. So my point today really is this. At least according to the Bible, and probably according to any good philosophical discussion, to love God and really enjoy life to the degree that God would want you to, and that's to a pretty high degree, in order to do that, you've got to be willing to speak of, to think of, and to interact with other people very well, even in the face of an offense from them. That's the secret of the day. That's the secret of the word for us, okay? Now, true, you and I are going to face some tough relationships. I'll bet if I were to poll people sitting in here this morning, you'd probably find that there are even some that are in the middle of a storm of monstrous proportions. It's bad. There was an offense. Something that has happened that's just huge. And some of us also know we've had some offenses that are fairly small, and you know that happens, and they rub your feathers the wrong way, and you move on. But the bottom line is we're all going to face, to some degree or another, offense. And if you haven't experienced much lately, you probably will as days goes on, because that's part of our human experience. We have to live and work and do life together. So offense is a part of the deal. And the problem is, if we just decide to bail out, then we bail out on all the opportunities that God is extending us to really see our life go to the next level, to where we can endure and weather those storms the way he wants us to. So we don't want to do that. That's not a good option. We're better off trying to figure out some tools, some ways to hang in there. I mean, it's one thing for someone to say, you just got to move on and get on with it. You just got to be a forgiving person. You know, don't you want to slug people like that? It makes me insane when they just sort of boil down all of my life issues to that simple little platitude. You know, you want to strangle them. And so don't do that unless they really need it, in which case you have my permission. But otherwise don't, because it's just wrong. But God would give us a couple of tools, I think, today that we can use to prevent ourselves from becoming what I would call a spiritual transient. Now, when I say spiritual transient, I mean someone that responds a certain way when they're offended, and they take matters into their own hands. Let me define a spiritual transient for you. Can I do that? A spiritual transient is someone who at one time was connected with a body of believers, people that, a faith community in a church or whatever. Something happened, they got burned, and so they pulled back. They wandered away from their faith. They were never able to really speak well of a church or a faith community again, never able to trust other church people or other people of a faith community, never able to fully re-engage that experience in a vulnerable way. They just sort of got lost. They sort of walked away, and that was it. They were done with it. You know, I have a few friends right now in my life that are currently spiritual transients, and they have legitimate reason to be spiritual transients because they got burned. Legitimately, they got burned. And they would tell you to a person that they recognize that they're sort of in a spiritual transience mode right now. And they also would agree with me when I say staying in that spiritual transience mode is a very dangerous thing. And I can also tell you this, because I love these people very much. They don't realize, but they are in danger of remaining spiritual transients if they don't do something about it here pretty quick. They probably would agree with me on that, but I see that in their life right now from what's happened to them. Okay, so for the sake of analogies, maybe it's already clear, I want to talk about those seasons of offense and frustration that we each experience in the term of a storm. Storms happen. Storms find you, even if you're not looking for a storm, okay? So in light of that, little bit of advice. Here are the tools. I want to give you some tools that hopefully would be practical. And by the way, as Adam would say anytime, because I know his heart, I'm not speaking from the Tower of Ivory wisdom where I've perfected any of this. I haven't. I'm working on this in my life. We've got situations going on in our home church at this very moment that are stretching all of us as Christ followers to rise above the offense and above the storm and hang in there. And so I'm having to work with this even on the drive up to Helena and on the way home from Helena. It's very relevant for me right now. So if this is meaningless to you, then this is a great therapy session for me. Thanks for being here for me. I appreciate it. All right? So during a storm of offense, when you find yourself in the middle of it and the winds are blowing and the stuff is coming down, sink your roots deeper and stay where God planted you. You always hear this in survival things. When you're in the middle of a storm, you just want to stay put. You want to hold on to something that's anchored and wait for the storm to pass. The last thing you want to do in the middle of a storm is go wandering around. You're liable to walk off a cliff or walk off to some place where people can't rescue you and you'll die. So in the middle of a storm, stay put. Don't make any decisions when you're in the middle of a storm. I found some interesting facts about post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD usually associated with combat veterans who come back from a combat situation and they go through PTSD. And you've heard a little bit about it. If they've been in combat, those memories come back. And there's some common denominators about people who have PTSD. They say that isolationism is one of the common denominators. When they struggle from PTSD, eventually they have troubling memories and nightmares that keep coming back. And it induces in them a sense of hypervigilance. There's depression, there's anxiety, and there's emotional detachment, and ultimately it plays out in avoidance of people, especially avoidance of crowds. That's sort of a trademark of PTSD. It's one of the common denominators. Now, the issue of transience, and this is what I found interesting, the issue of transience are homelessness, a perpetual state of wandering around and never able to sink roots or fully engage a set routine in life. That's a very serious problem for many people who struggle with PTSD. Because again, they're pulling away from people and they're pulling away from community. Now, although combat or mortal danger, PTSD, is something that we think about as a fairly common experience, you know, they've probably done enough studies to show that any significant trauma that we have as people has a form of PTSD that falls out from that. And the proof is, you think back to a time when you have been traumatized in a relationship because somebody's offended you or hurt you deeply, you could probably identify some PTSD, couldn't you? You know, I wanted to pull away. My hands went up and I started guarding myself and staying protected. And being around a group of people like that, I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to get hurt again. And certain things would come up in conversations, and it was almost like the nightmares. You know, you're back in the middle of the combat. So there's a certain degree of post-traumatic stress that happens to each one of us, even if we weren't in a combat situation. And you see some of the things fall out, like when a spouse cheats on the other spouse, and a divorce ensues. There's PTSD in that. If somebody lies to somebody or stabs them in the back on the job, or there's a lawsuit between a couple of people, and you go to court, and there's a PTSD that comes from that. Basically, anytime people let you down, you're vulnerable for this spiritual transience. That's what I'm trying to show you. Spiritual transience is one of those things that can happen if you're not on your guard. Now, we have a classic Old Testament story about somebody who was what I would call a post-trauma transient. All right? The guy's name was Jonah. And if you don't know the story about Jonah, we don't have time to go into the details. But the bottom line is, he was a guy pretty much like you and me. He had a job, he had a career, he had a faith community, and he had a falling out. Interestingly, it was a falling out with God. It wasn't necessarily a falling out with his faith community. It was actually a falling out with God. He was a successful prophet. He was God's man, did a lot of great things. God used him. But here was the falling out between God and Jonah that was the beginning of his spiritual transient situation. God wanted Jonah to do something very merciful and special for a group of horrendous people. And the people in the story would be on the same level as the Nazis. They were very, very cruel people, and God wanted to send Jonah to do something nice for them. And Jonah was upset because he wanted God to destroy him and punish him. And so they had a falling out. And so we got a snippet of the story I want to read for you that is put in kind of a modern language. It's a kind of an interesting paraphrase. So just to get it set in your mind, this is from the first chapter of Jonah. One day long ago, God's word came to Jonah. Okay, up on your feet, on your way, off to the big city of Nineveh, which is where this group of people lived, and preach to them so that they can repent and be rescued, so they get their hearts right, because they're in a bad way and I can't ignore it any longer. But Jonah got up, he went the other direction to Tarshish, running away from God. He went down to the port of Joppa, found a ship headed for Tarshish. He paid the fare and went on board, joining those going to Tarshish as far away from God as he could get. God said, go here. Jonah said, forget it. I'm transient. I'm heading out. I got burned. I'm on the way. What's interesting is eventually God and Jonah got things worked out, but not until some other things happened. You probably start to put the pieces together. If you don't know the story about Jonah, Jonah was the guy that was eaten by the whale and barfed up on a beach, and his life was changed. Imagine that. You get swallowed by a whale, barfed up on a beach, and things are different. I don't know how that would work, but I guess it does. I have to try it sometime. So my point is that Jonah becomes a spiritual transient in the wake of a trauma that challenged his faith. Now, putting it in context today, let's say someone in a faith community like this has a fallout with someone else, and it might even be the sort of falling out with God that's causing them to stumble. I've talked to people before in a funeral situation where they're angry. They're angry at God. How could this happen to this person? This doesn't make sense. And I'm holding God personally responsible for it. Or I've prayed earnestly for something to happen. I've done everything I know to do, that all the Bible people tell me to do, but it's just like God is either not listening or the exact opposite happened. And I'm mad at God. I'm ticked off at God. That's a legitimate experience that we have. And so in our current day, that might be the experience more than it would be with Jonah and God going to a different people. But that's what I call a setup for a transient approach, or a transient response to that situation. So what I want to do is give you a couple of things that I think might help you to process. Understand that when you're in that vulnerable situation of offense and you just want to scatter and go the other way, or when you're having a falling out with God and you want to go the other way, you want to root yourself in. You want to make sure that you don't wander in the storm. That's a dangerous thing to do. And once you do that, if you decide to hold on to the tree trunk until the storm passes, then the next thing you want to think about is this. Don't just sit there anchored, disgruntled. Actually do something proactive. Produce fruit. That's the way the Bible would say, produce fruit. Be fruitful. So you're not just holding on in the middle of the storm and not wandering. You don't want to just sit there. You want to do something. I've seen a lot of people who've decided to stay in a church before. The church has offended them, but they're staying. But they're staying more because they're making a statement, you are not going to throw me out of this place, than they're staying to be a part of the church. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'm just going to be here to get in the way now. So, that's not the right attitude to have either, because again, if you're looking for God's very best in your life, then you've got to pull yourself beyond that. So the idea would be that you don't just sit there, but you actually produce fruit. I'll tell you what, I've seen people before that have been offended in a church setting, and they decide to stay, but not only do they stay, they continue to give, they continue to serve, they continue to encourage, and they continue to participate in what's going on. And here's what happens. It's a miracle. Something changes in their life that's just beyond words and beyond description, and something changes in the lives of the people they're around. I mean, if you've ever seen this happen, it is nothing short of a miracle, because you know what happened to them. You know they have every excuse in the world to be mad and to be out of this place, but they're here and they're still engaged, and that's just so unusual. It's so remarkable, and it's so inspiring, and people take a lot of great inspiration by that. So you got two things happening. I hope you're seeing a pattern here. In the middle of a storm of offense, you're staying anchored. You're not moving. Don't make any decisions in the middle of that storm. And then while you're there, go ahead and stay productive. If you're going to stay anchored, you might as well stay engaged. But even people that do that well, sometimes when they leave the church parking lot or they leave that group of fellowship of friends that they've been hanging out with, they get into their car, they're brooding over the offense. They can't let it go. They're angry and they're frustrated. And you do this, because I do this. I'll drive in my car and I'll have the argument in the car. You know what I'm saying? By myself. Oh, you want a piece of me? You want to go there? We'll go there right now. If you want to talk about that, how about that time back in '64 when you did this? You're going nuts, and there's nobody even in the car, and people are watching you do this, and medication's wearing off, and all that stuff. And so you go home at night, and all you can think about is the offense. Every conversation you have about that person, the offense always comes back up. I got some good news for you. I've got some good news for you. The good news is that God built us in such a way that when we are offended, we have to do that. Let me say it again. We're wired in such a way as feeling emotive people that when we're offended, when we're injured, we have to do a certain amount of processing. We have to work through anger. We have to work through all of the things that you have in grief. There's a lot of things that go on. That is normal, all right? But here's how you prevent yourself from being polluted or overloaded by that reaction, that normal, healthy reaction. If you stay here in this brooding stage or in this angry stage, it's like a pond that becomes polluted, and pretty soon everything is going to die. It becomes toxic. You got to let some fresh water flow in, and here's how you do that. You give yourself permission to do this, because you're going to need to do that in a safe way. But you've also got to spend at least as much time turning your face to God and saying, but God, I do believe you have a plan for me, and I believe it's a good plan. I believe you are a God who loves me and loves the other person involved in this, and I don't feel like praying for them. I don't feel like being charitable toward them, but I'm going to give you the credit, and I'm going to ask you to do those things in me. You know, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but here's how it works in my life. If I spend the drive up to Helena grousing about something, then the balance is the drive home to Billings. I'm not grousing about it. I'm just kind of thanking God for all the good things he's doing in my life. My idea is if 50% of the time I'm frustrated, then 50% of the time I want to direct my thoughts and my words and my attitude in another way. So it's balanced. Because I know that that's the only way fresh water is going to flow in. If I drive up to Helena, grousing and frustrated about something, and drive back to Billings this afternoon the same way, I've just made the water more toxic for myself. I haven't helped myself. Do you understand that? But if I balance it out and invite at least half the time of just celebrating God and just getting my mind on him and getting my mind off of my problems, it'll begin to balance out. And chances are there's going to be some good things that'll happen from that. And listen, this is so important. I can't tell you how many times I've been in situations with people, and I kind of make fun of it a little bit, but it really is true. I've been in situations where people will try to talk you out of your normal wired emotions. You just need to forgive. That's what you have to do. It's got to be nice. Now, they weren't very nice, but you've got to be nice. And it's just, that's not reality. And that doesn't help. Because first of all, it completely dismisses most of the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament had writers that were basically shaking their fist at God, angry about something. And God called them people after his own heart. Because at the end of the day, after they were done being angry, they could turn their hands up to God and say, but I know you love me, and I know you're a God of love. I'm not bailing out on you, God. I'm just hurting right now. And God said, that's somebody who's got the right picture. They can deal with their humanity, but they can get some fresh water flowing in. What I want to do in closing is just pray for you. I mean, I have no idea what's going on. Maybe your life is just going great, in which case, again, this has been a marvelous group therapy session for me. I thank you. Put a couch up here next time when I show up. I'll just lay down, and you guys take notes and nod and every now and then. But if you're in a place where you've been offended recently, or maybe something happened earlier in your life, and that trauma is affecting your life today in the way that you trust people and the way that you trust God, then I want to pray for you, because I think God's got good stuff in store for each and every one of us. Let me pray for you. Lord, we do recognize that we can't have a pulse and we can't walk in this life for very long without being rubbed the wrong way by people, because we are people and we do that too. We just know it to be true. And so we know that we have permission right now to struggle well and to be frustrated. We know we have permission to find a few people in our lives that we can unload on, and that can hear it and can help us and can be sounding boards without fear of us polluting them or getting them to become cheerleaders for our offense. And if we don't have a good complement of those, I pray, God, for anybody in this room that doesn't have someone to talk to, that you'd reveal someone safe that they can talk to. But we also recognize that we have permission from you to balance out our dealing with those emotions by acknowledging you and by looking for some fresh water to flow in. That we have permission from you to balance those things out. We don't have to do one or the other. We need to do them both. And I pray that if there's anybody here this morning that's in the middle of a storm and they walk through the doors today just feeling almost desperate, maybe almost ready to throw their hands up and head to Tarshish and just move away from you and from people, I pray, God, that they would be encouraged to know that it's no mistake they're here. It's no mistake that this is what we're talking about, and that you have a way for them to navigate down a line that allows them to grieve and process appropriately, but also have hope and have encouragement. And there's nothing hypocritical about it. It's called a journey of faith. It's called being a faithful person. So help us to do that well. Help us to love each other well. And Lord, I also pray that we would be loved well. Bring people into our lives that can love us and encourage us at the level that we need to. And if that'll happen, and if we can take those tools with us today, then it's been a good day. And we thank you for this very good day today. And we ask this as a prayer in the name of Jesus, and we would agree by saying amen. Thank you so much for your time. It's a lot of fun.